It was a cold winter morning when James Thornton stepped out of his sleek black limousine in the heart of Chicago. The air was sharp, the streets were busy, and the hum of the city seemed to drown out everything. But nothing could drown out what he saw. Three little children, maybe 6 or 7 years old, were huddled together on a corner near a run-down calf. They looked identical, like three perfect copies of one another, same curly hair, same piercing green eyes, same dimple in the left cheek. James froze. Those eyes, that dimple, that face, they were his. He didn't need a DNA test to tell him that. He knew his own face when he saw it, but there they were, dressed in hand-me-downs too thin for the weather, their small hands clutching paper cups for change. And beside them stood a woman he hadn't seen in almost 8 years. Carmen. Carmen with her deep brown skin, her warm smile that had always made him feel grounded, her sharp wit that could keep up with any boardroom battle. Carmen, the woman he had loved in secret, the woman he had abandoned when the world told him he couldn't have her. James felt his chest tighten. The air seemed colder now, his breaths heavier, his mind raced as he tried to piece together what he was seeing. What were they doing here? Why weren't they safe? Why didn't he know about them? He took a step closer, his polished shoes clicking against the sidewalk. Carmen turned, and when her eyes met his, the warmth was gone. All that was left was a mix of anger, pain, and something else, pride. "James," she said, her voice steady but low. "Didn't expect to see you here." He swallowed hard. "Carmen, are they yours?" She finished for him. "Yes, James, they're yours." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He looked back at the children. They were staring at him now, curious but cautious. One of them, he couldn't tell which, tugged on Carmen's coat and whispered, "Mama, who's that man?" "That man," Carmen said, her voice cutting like ice. "Is nobody important?" James flinched. Nobody important? Once, he had been everything to her, and now, standing before her with his tailored suit and his billions, he felt small. "Carmen, we need to talk," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "We talked enough 8 years ago," she shot back, "when you decided your reputation mattered more than us, more than me." He closed his eyes, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had ended things with Carmen because he had been too afraid of what his family would think, too afraid of what his investors would say if the media found out the golden boy of the Thornton Empire was dating a black woman. But now, none of that mattered. What mattered was right in front of him. "Carmen, I didn't know, of course." "You didn't know," she interrupted. "You didn't stick around long enough to find out." James felt his throat tighten. He wanted to argue, to explain. But what excuse could he possibly give? He had walked away, and now, these three beautiful children, his children, had been left to struggle because of his cowardice. "Let me help," he said finally. "Please, let me do something, anything." Carmen laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of humor. It was bitter and hollow. "Help? Now you want to help? Where were you when I had to work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads? Where were you when they asked me why their daddy didn't love them enough to stay?" Her words cut deeper than anything he had ever heard. James had faced hostile boardrooms, ruthless competitors, and even the occasional scandal. But nothing compared to this. "I'm here now," he said softly. "Too late," she replied. James looked at the children again. They were watching him with those eyes, his eyes. One of them gave him a small, hesitant smile, and his heart shattered. "I don't want your money," Carmen said, her voice breaking for the first time. "I just want you to leave us alone. We're doing fine without you." But they deserve better, he said, and I can give them better. They deserve a father who doesn't run away, she said, and you can't give them that. James didn't know what to say for the first time in his life. Words failed him. He had spent years building an empire, making deals and winning battles. But here, in front of Carmen and those three little faces, he realized he had lost the most important fight of all. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice trembling. Carmen nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. I know you are, she said, but sorry doesn't change the past. She turned to the children, her voice softening. Come on, babies, let's go. As they walked away, James felt a tear slide down his cheek. If you believe in the power of stories to heal, to teach, and to inspire, this is your place. Subscribe now and be part of a community that sees beyond the headlines into the lives that shape them. Together, we'll explore stories that truly matter. He had never cried in public before, but he didn't care. And as he stood there, watching the woman he had loved and the children he had never known disappear into the crowd, James realized that all the money in the world couldn't fix what he had broken. The next day, James made a decision. He couldn't undo the past, but he could try to be part of their future. Whether Carmen let him in or not, he would find a way to make sure his children never struggled again. Because now he knew what mattered most, and it wasn't his reputation. It was them. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest in James Thornton's life. Every night, he lay awake in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the faces of those three children. His children. He thought about Carmen's words, her pain, and the life she had endured without him. He thought about his own selfishness, his cowardice, and how much he had missed. James wasn't sure where to start. Carmen had made it clear she didn't want his money, but he had to do something. He hired private investigators not to spy on her, but to understand her situation better. What he found left him ashamed. Carmen lived in a cramped apartment in one of Chicago's rougher neighborhoods. She worked as a waitress during the day and cleaned offices at night, barely making enough to cover rent and food. The children went to an underfunded public school with high dropout rates. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. James began making changes behind the scenes. First, he bought the apartment building where Carmen lived. He didn't evict anyone or raise rents. Instead, he renovated it, fixed the heating, repaired the leaky roof, and hired security to patrol the area. Next, he anonymously donated millions to the school where his children studied. New books, new computers, better teachers, whatever they needed, they got. He wanted to do more, but he knew none of this would matter if Carmen didn't trust him. One day, as Carmen walked home from work, she noticed something strange. The streetlights on her block were brighter, the sidewalks cleaner, and the playground at the corner had new swings and slides. Her landlord had sent a letter about repairs being done to the building, but she didn't understand why it was all happening so suddenly. Then one evening, she found James standing outside her apartment. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tired but firm. "I came to talk," he said, holding up his hands in surrender. "No strings attached. I need you to hear me out." Carmen hesitated. She wanted to tell him to leave, but there was something different about him now. He looked vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "Fine," she said. 5 minutes. James took a deep breath. "I know I can't fix what I've done. I know I hurt you, and I hurt them. But I want to be better. For them. For you." Carmen crossed her arms. "So what? You're just going to throw money at the problem and hope it goes away?" "No," he said quickly. "That's not what this is about. I've made mistakes, huge ones, but I'm here now, and I want to be part of their lives, even if it's just as a name they know. I want to help in whatever way you'll let me." Carmen studied him for a long moment. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but sincerity didn't erase the years of struggle, the nights she cried herself to sleep, or the questions her children asked about their father. "They don't know who you are," she said, finally. "I know," James replied, "and I won't force myself on them. I'll wait. I'll prove myself to you first." Carmen shook her head. "You don't get to just walk in and out of their lives, James. If you're serious, you're in this for the long haul. No disappearing. No excuses. They've had enough. People let them down." "I understand," he said. "Do you?" she asked, her voice rising. "Because if you hurt them, I will never forgive you." James nodded. "I won't hurt them, I promise." Carmen sighed. "We'll see," she said, "but this isn't about what you want. It's about what they need." From that day on, James began visiting the neighborhood regularly. At first, he stayed in the background, observing from a distance. He didn't want to overwhelm the children or push Carmen too far. Slowly, he started to help, offering to drive them to school on rainy mornings, bringing groceries when the fridge was empty, and fixing things around the apartment. When they broke, the children were wary of him at first, but over time, they began to warm up. He didn't push them to call him dad or demand their affection. He just showed up every day, proving with his actions what his words couldn't. One afternoon, as James helped the kids with their homework, one of the boys, Michael, looked up and asked, "Are you really our dad?" James froze, his heart pounding. He looked over at Carmen, who gave him a small nod. "Yes," he said softly, "I am." Michael frowned. "Why weren't you here before?" James felt tears sting his eyes. "Because I was scared," he admitted, "and I was wrong. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Michael studied him for a moment before nodding. "Okay," he said simply, then went back to his homework. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Months turned into years, and James became a steady presence in their lives. He wasn't perfect, and there were times when Carmen still struggled to trust him completely, but he kept showing up, kept proving that he was there for the long haul. And one day, as James watched his children play in the park, laughing and carefree, he realized something: his billions, his business empire, his reputation. None of it mattered as much as this. He had found what he had been searching for all along: a second chance. As the years passed, James Thornton became more than just a man trying to make amends. He became a father in every sense of the word. He didn't just provide for his children financially, he became a part of their lives in ways he never thought possible. He coached their soccer games, attended their school plays, and helped them with their science projects. He learned the hard way how to braid his daughter Maya's hair, endured long talks with his son Michael about his dreams of becoming an astronaut, and spent hours teaching Matthew how to fix a bike chain. He didn't just want to be their father. He wanted to be someone they could depend on, someone they could trust. Carmen remained cautious at first, but even she couldn't deny that James was changing. He no longer cared about the opinions of the elite circles he once moved in. He didn't flinch when people whispered or stared at him for being with Carmen and their children. His priorities had shifted completely. One evening, as they all sat together at the dinner table, something that had become a regular occurrence, Carmen watched James laugh at one of Maya's jokes. The children adored him now, and James was no longer the polished billionaire she once knew. He was a man who had finally found his purpose. "James," Carmen said, after the kids had gone to bed, "I need to say something." He looked up. From his coffee, his expression open but cautious. "You've done a lot for them," she said softly, "for us. And I see how much you love them." I just, I never thought I'd see this side of you. I didn't think I had this side of me, he admitted. But they brought it out, and so did you. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I used to hate you, you know, for what you did, for leaving. I hated me too, he said, but now, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Now, I think maybe you've earned a second chance. Not just with them, with me too. James's heart skipped a beat. Carmen, I don't get ahead of yourself, she said, with a small smile. I'm not saying we can just pick up where we left off, but I'm willing to see where this goes. Slowly he nodded, his chest swelling with a cautious kind of hope. Slowly he agreed. Over time, James and Carmen rebuilt their relationship, brick by brick. It wasn't easy. There were old wounds to heal, trust to rebuild, and fears to overcome. But they faced it all together. The children were overjoyed when they saw their parents laughing together, sneaking playful glances, and sharing quiet moments on the porch after dinner. They didn't need to say anything. Their smiles said it all. Eventually, James sold his penthouse and bought a house in the same neighborhood as Carmen. Not because he couldn't afford something grander, but because he wanted to be near his family, where he belonged. Years later, at a small family gathering in the backyard of their modest home, James stood with Carmen, watching their children chase each other around the yard. I never imagined this life, Carmen said, leaning against him. Neither did I, he replied, wrapping an arm around her. But I'm glad we found it, she said. So am I, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the yard, James realized that he had everything he could ever want. Not the money, not the power, not the prestige, just the love of the woman he had wronged, and the children who had given him a reason to change. And for the first time in his life, James Thornton felt truly rich. The years turned into decades, and the Thornton family's story became one of resilience, forgiveness, and love. James continued to pour his time and resources into their community. What began as quiet, anonymous contributions to the neighborhood eventually blossomed into larger initiatives. He funded scholarships for underprivileged kids, revitalized parks, and created mentorship programs for youth. His efforts weren't about redemption anymore. They were about building a better world for his children and others like them. Carmen, now a respected figure in the community, became his partner in these endeavors. She started a local non-profit to support single mothers, inspired by her own journey. Together, they worked to uplift others, drawing strength from the family they had created. Their children grew up surrounded by love and purpose. Maya became an artist, her vibrant paintings capturing the essence of the community that had shaped her. Michael, true to his dreams, worked for NASA, breaking barriers as a black astronaut. Matthew, ever curious and inventive, became an engineer, designing sustainable technologies for developing countries. Each of them carried the lessons their parents had taught them, that love is stronger than fear, that people can change, and that family is worth fighting for. One warm summer evening, the family gathered in the backyard of their home, a tradition they had kept alive through the years. The house was bigger now, expanded to accommodate their growing family as grandchildren raced across the lawn, their laughter filling the air. James, now in his 70s, sat in a rocking chair, watching the scene with a peaceful smile. Carmen sat beside him, her hand resting on his. They didn't need words to express what they felt. Years of shared struggles and triumphs had bonded them in a way nothing could break. Do you ever think about how it all started? Carmen asked softly, her eyes following their grandchildren as they played. All the time, James admitted. I still see that day in my head, the moment I saw them for the first time. I didn't know how much my life was about to change. You didn't just change your life, Carmen said, her voice filled with warmth. You changed all of ours. James looked at her, his green eyes glistening. You saved me, Carmen. If it weren't for you, for them, I don't know who I'd be. Carmen smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. You saved yourself, James. I just gave you a reason to try. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and orange, their eldest grandson ran up to them, holding a drawing he had made. Grandpa, Grandma, look, it's our family, the boy exclaimed, holding up a picture of stick figures under a big, colorful tree. James took the drawing and examined it with a smile. In the center were two figures holding hands, surrounded by children and grandchildren. Above them, the words, "Our family tree," were scrawled in bright letters. It's perfect, James said, his voice thick with emotion. It is, Carmen agreed, wrapping her arm around him. And as they sat there, surrounded by the laughter of their family, James realized something profound. Life had given him a second chance, not just to be a better man, but to leave behind a legacy of love and hope. For James Thornton, that was worth more than all the wealth in the world. As the years continued, the legacy of the Thornton family grew stronger. James and Carmen became pillars of the community, their names synonymous with hope and change. Their story was told not just through the lives they touched directly, but also through their children and grandchildren, who carried forward the values of compassion, perseverance, and justice. James often found himself reflecting on his journey. There were moments he wished he could erase, decisions he wished he could undo. But as he watched his family thrive, he understood that even the mistakes had led to this, the love and joy that now surrounded him. One evening, as James sat in the same backyard where so many family gatherings had taken place, his youngest granddaughter climbed onto his lap. She was a curious child, always asking questions about the past. "Grandpa," she began, her small voice cutting through the quiet of the evening, "is it true you were rich when you were young?" James chuckled softly, brushing a stray curl from her face. "It's true," he said. "I had more money than I knew what to do with." She tilted her head, her wide eyes filled with wonder. "Then why didn't you just buy everything you wanted?" James smiled, his gaze drifting toward Carmen, who was sitting nearby with their children and grandchildren, laughing over an old family story. "I thought I could," he said thoughtfully. "For a long time, I believed that money was the most important thing in the world. But then I realized something." "What?" the little girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That the best things in life aren't things at all," James said. "They're people, family, love, the moments you share with the ones you care about." His granddaughter frowned, as if trying to understand such a big idea. "So, you're not rich anymore?" James grinned, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "I'm the richest man in the world," he said, "but not because of money. It's because of all of you." The little girl seemed satisfied with his answer, leaning against him as she yawned. James held her close, his heart full. As the evening turned to night, Carmen joined him, settling into the chair beside his. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the hum of conversation and the laughter of their family. "You've come a long way, James Thornton," Carmen said, her voice soft but steady. "So have we," he replied, reaching for her hand. She squeezed his fingers gently. "Do you ever wonder how things might have turned out if you'd made different choices back then?" "All the time," he admitted. "But then I remind myself that every step, even the wrong ones, led me to this moment." And I wouldn't trade this for anything. Carmen smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. Neither would I, as the stars began to fill the sky. James looked around at the family they had built together. He saw the laughter, the love, the bonds that had grown stronger with each passing year. This was his legacy, not the wealth he had once valued, but the lives he had touched and the family he had fought to rebuild. And as the sounds of his children and grandchildren filled the air, James Thornton closed his eyes and let the peace of the moment wash over him. He had lived a life of mistakes, of regrets, of learning and growth. But in the end, he had found what truly mattered. He had found his home. And that was more than enough. If you believe in the power of stories to heal, to teach, and to inspire, this is your place. Subscribe now and be part of a community that sees beyond the headlines into the lives that shape them. Together, we'll explore stories that truly matter.